Song and dance.
Do you have another one of those dances in you?
No, I'm not. My wife's a dancer. I'm not a dancer.
Find something to be grateful for when things don't go right.
That's life. That is life. All right. Well, you guys definitely know that we're live now because that's not something that would be pre-recorded. Okay, let's start. So, Kim, thank you guys for being here and traveling all this way to
Thanks for having us.
Do a part two.
Yeah, this is great stuff, and this is what's really important about what it is that we do, right?
Yeah. And last time, Kim, you came all the way out here, and
just
the altitude,
to stay horizontal.
Altitude just totally took you out of the game. So, but we appreciate you guys being back. So we're gonna get into it. So the first thing is we've done a couple of webinars and these live streams that have pretty much set a good context for what we're going to talk about tonight. Tonight we're going to try to dive right into actual use cases, case studies, showing some befores and afters. We're also going to introduce a new tool, and this is something that we're really excited about. It's kind of in beta form, but it's going to help you actually execute what we're going to talk about tonight. So let's go ahead and lay out the agenda and then get started. So a big piece of tonight, which we would love your engagement. We do want to carve out some time at the end where we'll take live questions on where you guys would just get on and actually ask the questions themselves. But as you're listening, as things are going through your mind, make sure you're using the chat feature, the Q&A feature. There's also going to be some team members on there prompting maybe some questions, because we really want to understand how do we apply these principles to the specific circumstances you are in. And so that engagement would be huge for us. And then we can figure out better ways to obviously do future live streams, but there are some opportunities to actually do some things tonight in a custom way. So your participation would be awesome. All right, we're going to get into a lot of what we have been doing the last over a year now, which is really laying out what we're all conditioned by in society. I mean, we wake up every day, we see very similar commercials, we're exposed to advertising, whether it's social media, whether it's the radio, whether it's podcasts. And sometimes we don't realize that as we see something over and over again, it tends to kind of ingrain in us that this is the way to do something, this is the right way to do something. And we see that oftentimes in financial services where people are just doing what they think they should do, and then the end result is not what they expected, but by the time they get to the end result, it's too late. And so tonight we're going to talk about some things that are what most people think are commonplace, what you should do, and then we're going to get into the numbers and actually show the results of that. Because obviously, having a company called Paradigm, and Kim and her company Todd talking about truth concepts. I mean, we obviously have experienced some stuff in our career that put us on this path that is against the grain. And we're not against the grain for the sake of it. We're against the grain because we've questioned the status quo, and then we've validated our questions and discovered that, wow, here are some opportunities in which we can actually teach people, start a business. And I'm almost 20 years into it. You guys are over 30 years into it. And so tonight, the same conditioning exists. Now, it may have different words, different language, but as you start to realize that what we hear and not questioning what we hear oftentimes can lead to some unintended consequences. I'm not saying everything's bad, but I'm saying sometimes we have to ask some questions and just not accept things at face value.
I'll just add in there, the statistics today are showing that 10,000 messages a day are hitting our brains. And it's why we have to be so careful about what we're taking in and really look at the time that we spend taking things in, which is why your time with us tonight is so valuable and meaningful to us. And we hope to make it equally meaningful to you, because we know that 9,000 plus of those messages are pulling you away from what you might want in your life. And so it's our joy to help you avoid what the cost of the crowd is doing and create your own path.
No, that's well said. And here's the thing, it's not just, I don't see any kids on here. We're mostly all adults. But there are either kids in our life right now, or there will be kids in our life in the future. And it's not just us. It's what our kids, what our grandkids, our future generation is going to be exposed to. And you go back generation after generation, and even though there's different things to buy, there's different language, different messages, there's a very common theme. And I asked you guys the question at lunch. I was like, so when has doing something just average and normal ever worked out, right? And it sounds funny, but at the same time, it's, I think we kind of regress to the mean as far as what we're expected to do in life, right? Go get a job, put money here, do this. And if you really peel back like how we're exposed to that influence, it makes sense why we're exposed to it, because there's businesses that want to make money, that want our money, okay? And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but it's kind of binary, accepting things purely without being skeptical or even borderline cynical, I think is unhealthy. And it's not doing it for the sake of doing it, it's doing it in a practical, principled, mathematical way, right? And so tonight we're gonna dispel some of the things that we see out there that on the surface don't seem that harmful and destructive, but you look at the cost of actually following the typical path, and the numbers are astounding. I mean, you couldn't even, you had to go back and you couldn't believe.
Recheck it, right?
You couldn't believe so that's what we're hoping to discuss tonight, and hopefully you guys find some value in that. Then we're gonna talk about lessons from history. As I said, there's patterns, because what's going on right now in our society, we think it's so new, it's so revolutionary. And of course, there's a lot of new things, a lot of revolutionary things. But if you look at the patterns of history, human beings don't really change that much. The environment does, but the human nature side of it doesn't change that much. It just operates in a very similar environment, and that's where you can see the patterns. And so we're gonna talk about those patterns. And here's the thing, like we talked about last time, we have an opportunity to break the pattern of our family. Because growing up, we were taught things about money from our parents, from our uncle, from our cousins, from the town that we grew up in. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but we were influenced by our environment. And if you love the results in your life, then that's incredible from a financial perspective. But if you connect that conditioning has given you the results that you have in your life, and you want different results, you have to break the pattern. And it's for you, but it also becomes your stewardship to break the pattern for your kids and grandkids, because they're learning from you. They're seeing, whether you're teaching them directly or not, they're seeing what you're doing. They're paying attention to how you respond to things, how you react to things, how you use money, how you invest. When things go great, when things don't go great, they see that and internalize that, and that ultimately creates that behavioral pattern that they carry into their family, and then the next generation, and then the next generation. So here's our opportunity to break that pattern, and we're gonna give you some tools that make it, I'm not gonna say it's easy, but tools where you can get started with very little excuse or justification. And so hopefully you guys can stick with us to the end, because that's when we're gonna actually introduce some of those tools. And then, yeah, it's an investment. And I would say it's not necessarily an investment of money. I would say it's more an investment of energy, because as adults don't change much. A lot of what is how we wake up every single day, our patterns, our behavior, it's the same as it was, or very similar to was the day before that. And so the investment is more gonna be focus, mindset, energy, because breaking the pattern isn't a one-time event. It's something that we dedicate ourselves to, and that's ultimately gonna lead to different behaviors. And over time, that is what creates that difference.
One of the comments was kids learn very young, and we'll have, as we finish up, some things that your 1 and 2 and 3-year-olds can do today.
Yep.
I can't wait.
Yep. All right, so, and then the road less traveled, we're gonna reiterate that this is not the typical path. This is not something that is gonna be heard in conventional media, on social media. And so understanding that, I think it's an actual clue, and that's why I put the light bulb on. Because when I see things that people scrutinize and people are like, they demonize, I actually pay attention to that. Because when somebody goes against the grain, I respect that, and I feel that a lot of the innovation that takes place over the cycle of humanity is often because people question the status quo. They question the road that is traveled most, and there's countless examples of that. All right, and like I said, here are 2 QR codes for the previous live streams that we've done if you are on here for the first time. And our team is on here right now, and they can, if you don't have those links, we're obviously going to move on from this slide, but they can also give you those links so you can have them handy. Okay, let's get into it.
Okay.
So we're starting with the end in mind. So if you guys look at this timeline just is a simple way to represent our life cycle, right? This is the end. This is kind of the purpose why most people are putting money away, not spending now, not saving now, saving now, putting money away, deferring it, ultimately to live off of it at some point in the future. So this is an article from the Visual Capitalist as of the end of 2024. And it has $609,000 as the average savings between 65 and 74. Okay, so is this number good or bad? That ultimately becomes a question. Or what does this number represent? So money, and we talked about this before, money is either going to be spent by you, spent by the government, or spent by somebody else. Okay, and so really looking at deferring savings into the future, specifically retirement planning, is ultimately for you to use at a point where you don't want to work as much. Okay, so what does that $609,000 translate into? And this is where the Monte Carlo simulation, the 4% rule, ultimately what that means is you take a certain percentage of your portfolio over the course of 25 years-ish, and if you could show the screen one more time on that tile, that translates to $2,030 per month. Do you want to go into maybe some more detail of the 4% rule before we move into the next slide?
Yeah, it's interesting because it started out when I first got into the business. You mentioned earlier we'd been doing this for 30 years plus, right? It was the 5% rule. Okay, that graduated to the 4% rule. And actually, if anybody follows Dr. Wade Pfau, and that's PFAU, if you want to look him up, he's done millions, billions of iterations on supercomputers to actually show that number is probably closer to the 2.3 mark, 2.9 mark, if you want it to last for 40 years. And so the idea behind it is that you could pull that amount of money off with an inflation rate of about 3% and not run out of money over that 40-year time frame.
Yep. So we're not going to get into that. We did an actual whole live stream on portfolio management, Monte Carlo simulation, the modern portfolio theory. So if you guys want to go back and look at that previous live stream. But this is the end result. The reason why we wanted to start with the end in mind is the idea that everything that goes into the first stages, right, where this is the end stage. We can bring that slide up again. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's other stages starting with birth, then getting into adolescence, then getting into teenager, then young adulthood, right? Then professional, prime of life, and then finally at that retirement age. So the idea is all of that leads to this end result, which obviously if this is where you wind up as our clients, and this is one of the primary reasons why we're doing a lot of this content, is we have stewardship over that. Us being able to give you solutions so you don't wind up in this situation is our purpose. That's why we're in this business, to give you strategies to actually be better than this, and that's what we're going to be doing tonight. Okay, this is the big one. So this kind of shocked me. So today it costs about $245,000 to raise a child from birth to 18 years old. So kind of shocked you guys as well. Now what does this include? And this is the average over the course of the United States.
This is before the expense of education starts, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what's really crazy, right? And it's hard to believe that it costs that much, but is a child a cost, right?
So a couple things on this. This is interesting because it doesn't include college or any type of cost for activity after 18. And what's also, I think, unique about it is while it varies a little, it's fairly consistent across the country and across various income levels. Again, varies some, but this is everything. And so as we progress forward, one of our jobs in my mind is to help you, first of all, look at this and, all right, society calls it a cost. Do we think of it as a cost? I don't know about you, but I think children are some of the best investments that we can make.
Yep.
Secondly, is there a way, regardless of whether you call it an investment or a cost, is there a way to reduce it? And there is. So we'll look forward to sharing some ideas about that with you as we progress this evening.
And that's what we introduced this last time, which is, okay, these are expenses that you're going to incur. How do you optimize them? What are strategies in which you can look at ways, okay, it's going to happen. This is what you're putting into being able to fulfill a really fulfilling part of life, right? Which is raising another human being, influencing them, seeing them go on to the real world. I mean, that's incredibly fulfilling. So it's not, they use cost, we use investment. Now we're going to get into optimization. And based on that stewardship, what can we do in those early years of life to, prepare them for experiencing the financial world? Because just as everybody else is in adulthood, we're constantly being bombarded with ads, people trying to take our money, government's trying to take our money, tons of taxes. So they don't realize that until they're actually there. How can you prepare them earlier, establish those habits, establish those routines, so that as they get into really understanding the real world, they're equipped, as opposed to having to learn the hard way and repeat that cycle.
I'll just tell a quick story of two families. So one has what I would call entitled children. These kids have gotten focused on sneakers. That's what they're called, like the shoes that they wear, right? Sneakers. I had to get the guy to repeat it to me a couple times.
You've
on
never
the
heard
phone.
sneakers?
Really?
I just hadn't heard that term. Yeah, I know. Well, it's what happens when you grow up on
She's
a
from
farm.
Oregon.
That's right, you grew up on a farm, boots,
So
waders.
this family, the 15, 16-year-old kid wanted the newest set of Nike sneakers, $165, I think. And he collected sneakers, and the parents purchased it for that kid. So that's one of $165 out of this $245,000 as an example. I'm aware of another family where this child from a fairly early age was encouraged to think about how to solve problems. Well, one of the problems in his friends' lives are shoes, and especially athletes that wear out their shoes very quickly. Also kids that grow quickly and might actually grow out of a pair of shoes before they even wear it out. And so this family's 15 to 16-year-old kid is earning over $165 a day by selling refurbished shoes to his friends and family, and now his community, and has built a website and going on. And I use the $165 a day because the same price for the other family that chose to pay for the $165 of the pair of shoes. So that's just an example of where a family at early ages can shift the way a child thinks and get amazingly different results.
But the thing so what we're trying to reiterate is that it's a behavior that comes from a perspective or way of thinking. It's not just some tactic to do. You got to pay attention and understand where the opportunity is before you actually take action. So how does a parent or a grandparent create the environment in which kids think like that? And right now, I think we're in this incredible, revolutionary time, bigger than the Industrial Revolution, bigger than the internet, where if you can get kids to think that way, they'll change the world. But that's, again, this is just our perspective, but I feel that as you get equipped as an adult, you're now able to pass on something that will ensure that your kids don't follow in the same pattern of, being given 5 pairs of $165 shoes and the next widget, pair of skis, an iPad, a computer, and ultimately get into their adult life and not understand the principle of money and have to learn the hard way. Okay, so now what we're going to get into is the actual example. So last time what we decided to do is walk you through just vehicles, just cars, how much money will go in your bank account and out of your bank account throughout a 40-year period of time. And it amounts to, ultimately millions of dollars. In those transactions are opportunities for efficiency gains, opportunities to make better decisions, and it's going to change every single time you make that big purchase. Same thing goes for college education. So the average person is taught that this is the rite of passage, this is what we have to do in order to be, considered what? A high-standing member of society.
Average, right?
An average person. So we're not looked at as like the weirdo who didn't graduate college, right? That's essentially what society paints people who don't go to college as. And it's been, I don't want to use exploited, maybe that's a little too cynical, but maybe it's a good word. But this is the social expectation of what to do. And we wanted to show you that as these costs go up, it's not just the cost, okay, but it's what happens as a result of the opportunity that money could have had you saved, invested, and ultimately how that plays out into your retirement years. And it's staggering because we look at, okay, $34,000 for a 2-year degree. Okay, I can stomach that. But it's not just that. It's the cost of what you could have done with that money and what that means in the long run.
Yeah, and most people don't ever see that, right? How can you make a decision if you don't know what that cost looks like?
Oh.
Right?
And that's the principle. I think this, when you see it at face value, the direct cost, it's like, okay. But when you start to see the opportunity cost, that's when it's like, I have to do something.
Do we want to look at it?
Let's do it.
Okay. So we saw 108,000 was the average 4-year in-state cost, right? So if we take that, that's about $27,000 a year.
Yeah.
Just for tuition.
It's just
right?
tuition, yeah.
So we also have to have room and board in there unless they're staying at home, which obviously could be a great way to reduce that cost. But let's just assume that overall we had $40,000 cost per year for education to cover the tuition, to cover room and board, which would be probably on the low side, really. Okay, and so if we look at this, and this is just a quick example of somebody saving $40,000 a year, earning 5%, and over that time frame, with no increase in income, that kind of thing, we see that we have $172,000 a year worth of income that could be derived off of that between age 70 and age 99. Now, at age 99, they would be out of money, but this would go basically 30 years.
So you're saying the cost of that tuition...
Well, no tuition yet. Okay. Just if they were saving the $40,000 at 5%.
Which would have been $40,000 the cost of tuition. Or no?
Correct. I mean, but it's not for the whole time frame, right?
Got it.
So basically what they're doing is they're saving $40,000 a year all the way from age 40 to age 69. And then at 70, they go into the distribution phase of life.
Got it.
And when they do that, they would have almost $2.8 million, $2.79 million.
Yep.
And that would be $172,000 a year
if they
could earn that 5%, and that'd be totally depleting the account.
So that's
across
30 years of income. Got it. Okay.
Makes
so
sense?
That's no college tuition, nothing. That's just saving up the mountain, down the mountain.
You got it. And now what we want to look at is what would one child's tuition cost based on that $40,000 a year, knowing that tuition's going up by about 7% a year. So if this child was starting school in 8 years, so it's a 10-year-old child now, they're starting school in 10 years, we have to take it out of that savings.
Yep.
What that did was, so it was, simply $305,000. So a long way from the 108 that we were looking at earlier, even though those are the numbers that we used.
But because it's that far into the future, inflation...
Plus room and board.
Plus room and board.
Right? And so it's $308,000 total, but the devastating thing is it took $827,000 away from our pile of money in the future.
Yep.
And while that seems like a lot, and it is, the real impact is what does that do, as you mentioned, coming down the mountain? Yep. That's what's really important. I mean, why are we saving money? We save money for one reason, right?
Yep.
For that distribution phase. Otherwise, why would we save anything?
Exactly.
Okay? And so what's really important is what does that do to coming down the mountain? So we went from 172,000 to 121,000. Yep. So basically that one child's 4 years of school took almost a third of our retirement potential income away.
Yep. And now you multiply that by 2 other kids, and that's where you find the average American family if they end up deciding to pay for their kids' school, which is this scenario.
Right.
Okay.
And it's tough because, I mean, there's just no way that you can calculate that in your head that 4 years of school is going to take that kind of money away.
No, I know. Okay, so this is an example. Again, this is a bigger purchase. Obviously, we talked about automobiles, 1 automobile, then 2 automobiles. Now we're getting into college, which is at the end of that 18-year period of time. So shadow costs. It's not just the actual costs, and you could be carving out money into a 529 plan. You could be carving it out in just savings. It doesn't matter. As you're putting money in that area for that future expense, there is an opportunity cost because that money could have been used for something else.
Right.
Okay. All right, so why are we talking about this? I mean, I just want to reiterate, just so everyone on here understands that we're not saying not have these costs. We're not saying don't capitalize on the opportunities. We're not saying take the bus and not have a car. What we're saying is these are expenses that are part of life, and when you understand that, you understand that There's the expense of doing it, and then there's the opportunity cost that comes by choosing that path. And obviously, we're here tonight mapping out the problems, giving you a reason why the end result of that retiree is so low, so that you can understand if you do a few things, especially with mindset, how you approach finances, you can make a massive difference, not just in the numbers, but again, breaking that pattern, breaking that cycle. Because guess what? If you're in this, you're imparting on your kids, you're influencing your kids to actually follow the same cycle. And they're going to succumb to the same thing. It may not be the exact same numbers, but the same idea. Okay.
Well, I think something that you said there is really critical, and I think people need to hear that, and that is optimizing our costs. And that's why it's important to bring them out and see what they are. Optimizing costs can really have more impact than rate of return on the other side.
Yeah.
And I think what we hear from the media is how to chase the next risky thing to get some higher rate of return instead of going back. And if we could reduce costs, we wouldn't have to chase that rate of return.
Yep. And that's the point of a lot of these live streams is financial life isn't one area. It's multiple areas. And unless you cover the holistic perspective, you could crush it on your investments and be wiped out because you weren't properly insured, whether it's property or casualty or umbrella liability. Okay, so that's the idea, is like you want to cover all areas, but we're not going to get into, we covered enough protection last year. All right, let's get into another example. So this is another, I would say something that I was just really fortunate. I know, you have family, Kim, your son benefited from this idea, but if you look at a huge opportunity that exists, especially with our, I would say, inflation-based economy. First off, inflation is just going to be part of the package. It's how our monetary system works. Unless that changes, inflation will happen. Exactly how much inflation, but regardless, there's going to be inflation. So when you look at all assets, whether it's a bank account or a 401k or a car, they will decline in value based on inflation. So looking at an opportunity that happens really when kids go from their home and graduate into society, they have to live somewhere. Now, what happens with most kids? They graduate school, get into the workforce, they end up renting. And when they do that, there's the opportunity cost of home ownership. Now, with home ownership, what prevents kids from being able to put a down payment on a home, right? It's capital, okay? But what we're going to show is because of that, this is what the cost is. We're going to actually go into, we did that last time. So we did that. Yeah. So on the last presentation, we went into the rate of return of owning versus renting. Now, it was an example. Are there exceptions? Does it make sense to rent sometimes as opposed to owning? Yeah. But it's not an opinion. This can be actually demonstrated with math, and you can see side by side, okay, if I buy this house and put this down payment, and these are the costs, and this is what will go up in value over the course of time, what will that be versus me giving money to a landlord, giving money to a property management company every single month? You can compare both side by side, and it can demonstrate to you which one makes sense. And the example we gave on our last live stream was almost 15% internal rate of return after taxes, after fees, after everything over the course of 10 years. That's, again, it just shows this is something simple that's part of our lives. We have to live somewhere. I mean, I guess we don't have to live somewhere, but if we choose to live, in a town, and we either are going to rent or we're going to own, we're going to sleep on somebody's couch. I guess that could be an option.
A box under the freeway.
But you can make a decision if you have options. Yeah, and you can choose that, which is fine. But if you choose either live in a home and buy it, or live in a home and rent it, there's a cost and a huge opportunity cost. And so we showed that last time with pretty much a 15% internal return, which over the course of a market or any type of investment strategy, there's a high amount of risk to get that type of return. So this is another one of those opportunity costs that kids graduating into life give up because capital doesn't exist for them, because they keep this cycle going. The same cycle that I was a part of, the same cycle you may be a part of, you were a part of, but we decided to break the cycle, break the pattern. Anything you want to add on that?
I would just add some mindset aspects, because I think a lot of kids are falling in with the thought process of their friends. And so think about those 10,000 images. It's really important that we're helping them learn how to look at things differently. And that also can start at age 1 and 2. So if you're on tonight and you have children, you have grandchildren, you have great-grandchildren, this is the kind of thing that sharing with them, opening the door for conversation. In the United States, we do a horrible job of discussing money amongst families. I think that's another thing that is a mindset shift that can occur, that can really drive value down to those next generations, because you can set an example of having it be okay. You don't have to share a lot of detail, but just having conversations around money. I mean, we would sit around the family dinner table and talk through investment real estate, or talk through the owning of a life insurance policy. That was part of our conversation all the time. So that kind of thing can make a big impact. And so if you're not feeling like you can do anything about your monetary situation right now, you can always do something about your mindset situation.
And that's and those will help demonstrate how to actually do that through these tools that we'll give you guys at the end.
And the idea of I know a lot of times people say, well, are we going to get on with it and get to the meat of some calculations or that kind of thing? Yeah. But if we can have the best financial strategy in place, but if our mindset's wrong or not aligned, then none of that stuff's going to matter.
Yep.
I mean, it's really one of the most important.
Or it's short-lived.
It is.
Or it's short-lived. And we'll talk, we have an example of that too. So we did want to get into investment real estate, right? We wanted to just talk about a simple example of a rental property. And the reason why we decided to do this is because when I'm not saying kids, when those that graduate from their adolescence, from their childhood, they leave the home, they go into the workforce, when they experience home ownership, there's this weird thing. When you own property, it's like something changes inside of you. And it's yours, it's an extension of you, you treat it better. But when you start to understand the numbers behind it, it usually compels people to say, I want to do more of this. And so again, going to mindset, most people are not taught to purchase homes in an optimized way. There's a very cookie cutter, put this amount down, get this type of mortgage, pay it off as soon as possible. But when you understand it from this perspective, we're going to show you just how to look at and evaluate investment real estate and what the return will be on something that you personally own, you personally control. And just like a primary residence has tax benefits, is protected from inflation, there's the ability to use leverage because mortgage rates are so low when it comes to acquiring real estate, especially residential real estate. So let's talk through the example, right? This is just a really simple one. Again, there's a million different, I would say, listings of rental properties. We just chose one, and these are the specific numbers. So do you want to walk through numbers,
Sure.
Todd?
Can everybody see the?
Yeah, let's put it on the screen.
It's there?
There
okay.
we go. Perfect.
Okay, so this is just a simple real estate calculation based on a $200,000 piece of property requiring 20% down payment, so that we could finance $160,000. Now, what we did here was stretch it out to $360,000. If we had gone down the path that you were talking about and tried to pay it off $180,000, we'd have a higher or lower return. What do you think?
Lower return.
Yeah. So change it to 180 just real quick. We can see our return net of taxes of 13.64 at 180, which is paying it off faster.
Yep.
It actually drops our rate of return, right?
Yep. But there's
so
negative
stretching that out and understanding the value of a 6.75% mortgage in light of the amount of money that we're making on the investment.
Got it.
Actually pushes that out. So 360 on that. And then with our property taxes, insurance, maintenance, those things are going to go up. And the part of the reason that it's so valuable stretching it out is our mortgage payment stays level, right? All these other things get inflated, including
The
rent.
Yep.
So over time, the property actually does better and better and better as rents get pushed up due to the impact of inflation. And so here over this time frame, even if we sold the property, paid 6% in realtor fees 10 years out, our return on this is 13.64%. After fees, after taxes, after everything. It's pretty hard to beat. But what's the problem? The problem is
Down
it takes
payment,
$50,000 to get this started over there.
Yep,
Your
60.
down payment on the $60,000. The down payment on the property,
and closing
right,
costs.
plus the closing costs.
Yep.
So we're at $50,000, right? 40,000 plus 10.
Yep. So if you look at this again, it's the internal return after fees, after taxes, after sales commissions, et cetera. This again shows a return that would take a pretty decent amount of risk to get consistently over the course of this 10-year time frame. But here's something that is within your control. It's something you understand if you've purchased real estate and own your own home. This could even be the home that the kids purchased and lived in for a few years and then moved on and rented it out. I mean, there's a lot of different scenarios, but in the end, what prevents them from doing this? Again, this is opportunity cost. What prevents them is that initial capital. And also mindset. Obviously, it's not just money, but.
Hey, Mike, we're going to cover questions at the end, but if you want to put it in the chat box, there's a chance the team would be able to answer it for you.
Yep, cool. All right, so let's go back to the slide deck, and basically what we want to do is just kind of get into turning this around and just talking about how this problem isn't just this society, last generation, the generation before that. There's a really famous example, and I think one of our friends is on here tonight who wrote a book called What the Rockefellers Know, Mike Isom. But there's a recent example that came out in MarketWatch just a couple of months ago that explained this concept. And so what we want to do is just juxtapose two really wealthy families at the turn of the 19th century. One was the Vanderbilts, one was the Rockefellers. The Vanderbilts actually had substantially more money than the Rockefellers. In today's dollars, the Vanderbilt family had $100 billion. So $100 billion in today's dollars, or the equivalent. They built a fortune, but Cornelius Vanderbilt focused on the business,
life,
money, building, and didn't necessarily put effort into his family. Okay, so what happened?
Well, what's evident from over time is that the heirs were not trained on any other method than consumption. And so you have
which is a natural training. It's not intentional. That's like a natural. We're trained to consume.
Absolutely, yeah. It seems completely normal,
yeah.
And yet there's evidence of other families that are not doing that. So there's a fun quote. I'm not recalling the person that said it right now, but living an abnormal life now so you can live an abnormal life later. And they just were not conditioned to do that. They were into luxury and lifestyle. And there are many of them really admitting that inheritance was a burden, which is a sad thing. It left them feeling purposeless. It left them unsure of their gifts. And it put them in a situation where not only did they consume everything, they were irresponsible with the dollars. So that's the Vanderbilt family. Thank you, Michael Isom, for writing the book about them. And there's lots more stories that come behind that family and the detrimental monetary activities that they had.
Yeah, because money was gone after money's gone now. So
third generation.
Money's all gone.
Yep. So there is another family that many people have certainly heard about, the Rockefeller family. Did very purposeful teaching from a young age of their children and the work that their children got to do in acts of service, in physically learning. Now, they literally learned how money worked because that was the family's business, but it really wouldn't matter because whatever business you're in, whether you're an employee or you're an actual business owner, money is a part of the business of your family. And while you may want to say, well, money doesn't matter to me, and it may not be your top priority thing, money affects everything that matters. And so the Rockefeller family chose to very purposefully develop principles, develop structures, some of which we're going to share with you later, to help their children, their grandchildren, and now they're on their, 6th or 7th generation of families that have been good stewards of their wealth, where they were born into a space where money was treated properly, where those dollars meant something, where they understood the value of working and serving and how important that was. And that family has indicated that those principles are still in action today. And it's neat to see their children, again, numerous generations, viewing the inheritance as heritage. In other words, as something left in them, not just to them. Yes, they were left a lot of money, but they were also left with values and principles and teachings to then take those dollars and go do good with it, to take the skills and the talents that they were given and go do good with that. So this is a fun experience, just comparing these two families. And whatever level of the game you're operating in, you can choose which side you want to be on.
Anything you want to add?
No, I think, something that came out of this was what Kim said was the idea of intentional. Mm-hmm. Because we're going to learn from other people. We're going to learn good or we're going to learn bad. Yep. And it all depends on what they're dishing out, right? And so when we think about that, that's where our kids, grandkids, everybody else are. And so what is it that we're laying out there?
Yep. And what's the default? The default is what happened to the Vanderbilts, right? Default is you consume. Default is you do your best, but what we're compelled by, the human nature that's inside of us, is telling us to consume luxury, do cool things, but it's not to be a steward. And what ends up happening, again, opportunity cost, unintended consequence, is that money is gone. Because in order to actually perpetuate wealth, you have to understand the principles that created it in the first place, especially with that type of wealth. All right. Now let's get into this next slide, which will give us some opportunity to break into our actual case study. And we're calling this really the legacy window. So I'm not saying that adults aren't capable of being influenced. It's just much harder for adults to change the way in which they view the world, change behavior patterns, break habits. It's difficult. Can it be done? Of course it can be done. But looking at kids, they're learning right now. They're seeing, they're observing society, they're observing those with this type of lifestyle, that type of lifestyle, and they're connecting dots. If there's no intention behind teaching kids, they're going to learn and make the connections themselves. And that's going to lead to typically the same cycle and the same pattern because that is the default. So the legacy window, we started talking about it in the last live stream, which is teaching kids from an early age. When they start to connect that, hey, you swipe a card, you scan the phone, okay, and something comes as a result of that, there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that leads to being able to actually do that. And so when they ask for skis or a car or an iPad,
$165 shoes.
$165 shoes, right? It becomes, an opportunity to start teaching them, okay, yes, but this is how we're going to go about getting whatever you want. And this becomes kind of a family bank strategy, which we'll get to in a second. But when you start, you may not think it's that significant. And from a financial perspective, if you do $165 shoes, the financial gain and impact that has on the family, like with numbers, isn't very high. But the impact that has on the kids is substantially higher.
Probably higher education than the $50,000 a year college, right?
Probably infinitely more, right? And so that's the first thing is, how do you do this? Family governance, okay, is how do you establish the mindset, the principles, the routines, the patterns, the practices, okay? That's kind of the foundational element. And then the second is obviously the strategy we're going to use as the solution. Again, there's tactical things you can do, okay, but tactics without strategy will always fail at some point. Okay, so having an actual strategy, a system, something that perpetuates, okay, that's obviously, I would say going to lead to different results. But it's important to understand that the philosophy, the mindset, those patterns, those rituals, the repetition over and over and over and over again is what leads to lasting change. Okay, let's get into our little case study. So we basically, what we did is we put together something as simple as possible.
Cars first.
Oh, you want to do cars?
Just to show a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. So we'll go back and do cars because some of you guys weren't on the last live stream. So we'll go in and represent just kind of an expense other than education and what occurs over the course of time.
Well, I think it just follows in the idea of what we're talking about with costs. And it's just, chasing interest rates versus a cost and what kind of impact that could have. We saw earlier that the average
Chasing interest rates, you mean chasing rates of return.
Right.
Yeah, got it.
Right. And what we saw earlier in one of the previous slides was the idea that most families end up with, what was that, about $600,000?
Yeah, 609.
609. Okay. Well, if we look at this and we've got, let's say we've got an account that's got $65,000 in it. We're adding 15,000, big savers, earning 5% and increasing that savings by 3% a year. But we start to finance our cars out of there. One car that we're financing $35,000. So here's the scenario. Maybe the car is a $40,000 car. We've got $5,000 in it. We're financing $35,000. We use the car for 4 years. Everybody wants a new car. I love a new car until I saw this calculator, right? I mean, I can't lie. I like new cars. But what we see is we have about enough left over on a car in 4 years to go back and be the down payment for the next one. And that's really all it does. And so we just keep financing and financing and financing. And that's the whole idea, right? And so when we look at this,
Or saving up, paying cash, getting a lease, trading it in, same principle.
Whatever it is. So we've got $35,000 financed and $39 on down the line. And what we see is over this time frame, we spent $429,000 on cars, right? Or $439,000 on the upper left there. And so that was the pure cost of the cars. But what we don't realize is it took almost $1 million away from our future.
Yep.
So once we understand the idea of opportunity cost, because as soon as it came out of that account, it quit earning at that 5% rate, and so the cost is tremendous. The bigger issue is, in most families, how many of them are trading one car every 4 years versus 2 cars every 4 years, or maybe they're doing one every 2 years, right?
Yep.
One for him, one for her. And so if we change that and we do every 2 years, now we've just dwindled $1.7 million down to $15,000 just in purchasing cars. So this isn't about, how do you chase interest rates or rates of return to outrun that? Okay, what if we, and just a simple shift, what if we just said, what if we kept those cars for 6 years? Okay, so we're trading cars every 3 years. That's still a lot, but if we did that, what would that do? So that one thing actually picks up almost $600,000. It almost doubled what the average person has at that point in time, based on our previous statistics, right?
Yeah, the idea here with this example is it's going to be similar as we approach education, but and also similar to what we talked about in the last live stream, all these big expenses have opportunities to more efficiently or think through how we go about doing things. And it's not going to be this huge investment return or huge gain, but it's going to be one thing, like right here, being more efficient in the way in which you purchase big expenses. Then it gets stacked onto something else. It could be vacation. It gets stacked onto something else, which could be how you purchase a home. It could be stacked on how you invest. So it's not one or two things. It's how do you take this same mindset, the mindset of optimization, and apply that to all the different transactions you're going to have throughout your life. All right, so this graph is showing, we're going to get into the actual case now,
Case
right?
study?
Okay, cool. All right, Todd, this is all yours. So we're going to get into, again, this slide just shows just a simple example of, a 40-year-old couple. They're the couple that decide, okay, I get it. I want to make the change. This is what I'm doing right now. How does it play out? And then what are my options? And how is that going to impact my life?
Right. And one of the things that people forget in that cost scenario is we saw the cost of a child, if we want to call it a cost, up through 18. But we have that cost of education. And most people just in their head, they calculate, okay, 50,000 times 4 is $200,000. But as we saw earlier, that took away a third of the potential retirement income just for that one child, right? And so in this example that we're going to look at, what we see here is this $200,000. These are big savers. They're saving $40,000 a year into a typical or actually just a typical scenario strategy that we see today, and that's going into the 401k with just about everything, right? Having a little side fund maybe, and in doing that, we see a big cost right here. What is that? That's 3 kids worth of education. right? That some of that had to be borrowed at student loan rates, paid back across that time frame. But still, this is a successful family because they are savers. They end up with about $4 million out over the time frame. Now, I think $2.5 million of that is the house. Mm-hmm. So that's, it's a tough asset, and we have to think about, when that gets transferred, what happens. Part of that's qualified money, and so transferring qualified money, in other words, 401k dollars, has some pretty serious tax implications and time limits on, what that transfer is. And so, but they were able to carry all the way out with income. And so it works, but does it work the best that it could?
So Todd, if you would just elaborate a little bit on the graphs. The bars are what part, and the top is what part?
Okay, so the line is the asset value over that time frame, and the bars are the amount of income pulled out across that time to handle expenses. So we had expenses that moved around in that time frame based on what was going on, and our dollars pulled out covered those expenses. During the accumulation phase, whatever was left over we could save. During the distribution phase, that coming down the mountainside, obviously we're just consuming at that point in time and reducing our assets. And that's using the scale on the left-hand side.
So these bars are basically income and expenses.
Pretty much. They're just staying with it. Correct. Okay. Our expenses, it's pulling out enough to handle those expenses.
Out to age 85.
Right. But so what we looked at was this idea of the family bank. It's hard to use qualified money as a family bank, right? You can't. How are you gonna get in there and use that? And so it's pretty limited. It's just a one-shot tool. And one of the big reasons we like life insurance is because it opens up to so many different things that we can do. And it's not an either or. Most people look at it as we can either do this or that. Really, if we have life insurance in the mix, we can do multiple things. We can do that with other things. It just comes in when we place it, because one of the limiting factors on life insurance is whether we can qualify to get it. And we're more likely to be healthy enough to get it the earlier we are, right? And so that's part of the issue in there. But in this scenario, all we looked at was, what if we did a little bit of optimization in that we had the kids have some skin in the game for school. So we were willing to fund part of that, but the kids, they need some skin in the game, and for several reasons. Are they going to be more likely to go to class and do what they're supposed to do if it's costing them money?
Yeah, they have skin in the game. They're going to treat whatever they're doing differently. First off, as we were saying before, going into college, their mindset should be different. Right? Because when you go in and they see, okay, opportunity cost, this is a huge expense, especially with me seeing what impact it's going to have on my parents' future, right? Now they look at it as, okay, how can I optimize? Parents are going to look at it the same way, right? So you figure out ways to go into it and choose a career that aligns with your natural abilities, natural talents. It may not be formal education. It may be some sort of other type of training.
Or a business.
Or starting a business. Okay, so the idea going into it, you're going to treat it more efficiently. Okay, but the actual money that gets doled out, that's where the family, there's a lot of different options, but we chose to go with one option.
Right, and we've seen it with kids too. They're going to be more likely, if we can teach them this early on, to try to do something to push some of those costs out, right? By getting grants, by getting scholarships, by getting all these other things. So by scoring well during the accumulation phase, they can actually hope to offset some of that. And if it's coming out of their own pocket, that's probably what they're going to be doing, right? And so it definitely optimizes that. The other thing that we did was we did shift buying a car every 4 years to buying one every 6 years. Yep. And we did a delay of 10 years of the money going to the qualified plan.
So instead of money going to the qualified plan, we put it into life insurance.
A whole life insurance policy for 10 years and offset it.
Yep. And again, you could look at a combination between husband and wife and kids, and we just did $40,000 a year, 10 years, just to make it simple.
Right. And outside of that, now we have better financing rates that we could use on the education. Mm-hmm. We were able to create the family bank. And more importantly, with the family bank, because we could start it early, we could start financing those shoes where the kid pays them back. They start to understand that process of what that money means, how they can actually relate money to labor, so that now then it's got some correlation, and as you said earlier, not just swiping a card that comes from who knows where.
Yep.
Right.
And then same thing with, again, the going from a cost to an investment, right? Those costs they're going to happen. That's money that goes out for specific purposes, but some of it, okay, can be offset by teaching the kids.
Right. And so when we see that, and now what kind of difference did that make? Just those small changes, and it's huge what could actually happen. So what we see is we reduced our costs here on the education and deferred it into another place as far as being able to have another financing source. But look at our green line now. It's over $9 million. And by the time it gets out there on the end, that's, even though it's death benefit, it's actually all cash. In this life insurance policy, we actually had more income along the way, which could, in the last webinar that we did, we looked at buying life insurance on grandkids. There's plenty of extra money there to continue that process. So we can break the process now by putting this bank in a place where it can be used currently, but we can start to build that perpetual piece of now buying life insurance on the grandkids and continuing that process and using it as a tool alongside the other things, not instead of, but with them, right? And to optimize everything. And so that is a huge, huge difference that one small thing can make. And it's the same cash flow in either scenario.
Yep. And so this is just one move. So I'll explain a couple more details. So in that graph, we did the 10 pay on the life insurance, and what we did as a starting place is we looked at, okay, how can we get, based on the hierarchy of wealth, 30 to 40%, in that tier 1, which opens up a world of options, and then how can we keep this 1-to-1 ratio of death benefit to gross assets aligned? So that's kind of where our starting place was. But as we did the 10 pay, we just stopped at the 10 pay. And after that, we actually allocated money back into the 401k, right? So that's the delay. It doesn't mean you do one or the other. Now, you could do a lot of other things, and we could demonstrate that. It just becomes unbelievable when you do that. So basically, we just did something really simple, something that, obviously this is a certain situation, but they're just ratios and percentages. If you make more money, the numbers will be different. If you make less money, the numbers will be different, but the outcome will be the same. So the idea is, how do we make some small change, integrate this into, the family, start to use it, and we didn't say, okay, we're not going to do the 401k. We put money back into the 401k.
Absolutely.
Well, we could have kept going with rental real estate. We could have gone into financing homes for all of the kids, then financing rental properties. As Todd said on the last live stream, what we did is just demonstrated if grandparents purchased small insurance policies on kids when they were really young, the amount that they could use between the time that they were in that kind of adolescence all the way into young adulthood, that becomes an opportunity as well. But what we're trying to say is we didn't do that just because you probably wouldn't believe the numbers because they're so big. But that's the idea of what mindset does to the choices that you're going to have inevitably. These are choices you're going to have. Okay? So you either choose to follow the status quo, follow the pattern, and then your kids are going to repeat the exact same cycle, or you can choose to break that and start to look at all these transactions you're going to have, but in a more optimized way.
Yeah. One of the things that we talked about, and you kind of mentioned it, we looked at what if we had the money to be able to do that down payment on that piece of rental property. Let's look at it and see what that would do. Yeah, let's pull it just real quick. We didn't do this in our in our case file, but I think it would just be helpful just to see what kind of impact that could have.
Yeah, so it's not just, so you could do the primary residence, right? Where they have to live somewhere. This becomes an opportunity for them to have that kind of experience of compounding, but also the experience of ownership of property, which will then translate into a potential rental property. So now we'll look at, all right, if they did find something, how could they use capitalization from the family bank, from the family's pool of resources, to make that purchase?
Because there's the problem right there. A kid coming out of school, they've got student loan debt, they're barely making ends meet. Where are they going to come up with $50,000 to make that happen? And that's where that family bank becomes a huge piece. So let's borrow $45,000 from the family bank.
So now you have now we got to explain this because if you turn that second mortgage off, take a look at where the net cash out is. So if you go to the net cash out,
right?
Can you highlight that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's 91. But if you did Family Bank, where the Family Bank actually gets paid back with interest, okay, so now go to the turn on the second mortgage. Okay, the kids still have skin in the game, but it's only $6,000. Is it $6,000 or $5,000?
5,000.
Right? You want to highlight that right up top.
Yeah.
Okay, so investing $5,000 and cashing out 55,112. That's where the 36.98% return
Yeah,
comes from.
it's huge. So not only did the Family Bank make this possible, but it made it what 3 times as profitable.
Yep.
Yes, we end up with less money coming out, but we put way less money going in. And so what it means is ultimately we could save money that we're pulling off of this and do this again. We could do multiples of these with the same out-of-pocket cost.
Yep. And this can translate, again, like we said, if there's 3 kids, it could then empower them to do the exact same thing at an early age. There's enough capital in there to do a family retreat, a family cabin, right, where everybody could participate, but the family or the down payment, the capital comes from the Family Bank. So we just wanted to demonstrate a few things just so you guys could see little impacts, especially early on, benefit from compounding, because compounding happens over the long run. And this is just, don't necessarily get caught up on numbers, okay, because numbers are going to be different for everybody. But this is just the impact for this family. Obviously, you guys all have advisors, wealth strategists within the organizations, and they can help you demonstrate this. Look at your resources, see where there's opportunities to refine, to align, and then how you can start adopting some of these principles into the family. So do you want to get into the actual tool?
Yep.
Or do you want to?
The AI piece?
Yeah.
Yep.
So, all right, so let's get into one of the tools, which I think, in the end, I think that the numbers and the actual concept, I mean, this shouldn't be terribly new to you guys, but the actual execution is where sometimes there's a challenge. And so we put a lot of thought into this, and we looked at, okay, successful businesses, successful organizations, even successful families like the Rockefeller family, there's a specific foundation that they have. Organizations have a vision, they have a mission, which is its purpose, a vision where they're going, and then they have values. And those values are, how does the organization, the entity, the organism behave? So as we looked at whether it's Rockefeller family or other successful families, we peeled it back and said, okay, what are those foundational core documents, core, I would say communications to not just holding yourself accountable as maybe the Family Bank founder, but your kids, your grandkids, the language in your estate planning. So we spent a lot of time building this tool. So let's go ahead and show you this tool. And we introduced some of it last time, so we'll go ahead and click into the access. So first off, it has a way in which you can document loans to the family. Okay, that's one element, but we're going to get into these new ones, which is a document center. So this document center, what it's intended to do, it was basically programmed and trained to have essentially some of the core estate planning, legacy planning, like official documents, but also some of our philosophy so that it will make it easy for you to actually establish something for your family. So this is just a guided tour. Maybe we can exit that and then go into these Family Bank core documents. And there's a whole guide as you look right here, this downloadable guide. There's an interactive guide as well that'll walk you through the steps, but we'll go ahead and launch this first one. So this first one, basically, if you go to Family Bank mission statement, okay, you can create, essentially it walks you through instructions of how to do it, what it is, how long it's most likely going to take, okay, and then hit, I'm ready to create this document. Then it has kind of a checklist before you begin, just so you know that what the exercise entails. So let's go ahead and click all of those. Click that, and then I'm ready. And we basically built a custom GPT you guys will have access to. So you'll open that up first, and then go back to the window. In the window, if you scroll down, there's three different prompts. There'll most likely be additional prompts later, but we'll copy that prompt. Let's do that first prompt. And what does it say? Help me create a Family Bank mission statement that defines our fundamental purpose and reason for establishing the wealth strategy for our family. So let's go back in, copy and paste it. Where's the paste?
I think I copied. There we go.
There you go, and just hit send. And basically, it's programmed to actually create your mission for you. And then there's some elements in there where you can actually refine it. It has prompts that'll interview you and get your specific values, your stories, your financial philosophy, and integrate that as well. And then the idea right now, because if you look at the I would say, what's the best way of looking at it? The privacy of these documents. We decided not to house any of it on this app. So these will actually be statements that you will put into either Google Docs or Dropbox, essentially establishing these core documents for your family. We may be doing that in the future, actually most likely after we get some of your feedback. But if you go back to the Family Bank now, it gives you multiple prompts. That's just for the Family Bank mission statement. And then if you go into, you can go back and go to the, go back to the document creator and exit, skip that tour. So Family Bank core documents, you can go through all those first. So in there you have essentially a tool. Yeah, go ahead and click on that. Yeah. So scroll down. So this is where you can establish, your family vision, values. You as a founder of, the Family Bank can establish your purpose for doing that. There's kind of a legacy letter that can be put into your official estate planning. And then you can actually create a Family Bank borrower guide for your kids, for your grandkids, that lays out how it's going to operate. And then we even put something in there, family constitution framework, if you want to take it to another level. So these right here are essentially parts of the app that can establish just those core documents for your family right now in a really simple way. And we went a little bit further. If we're going to go back, and we actually built in, you can just click on Document Center right there. You can go into estate planning integration documents. These will actually be the official documents that you can run by your attorney, modify them. And if this is something you want to add to your estate planning, this can actually help you create that customization. And then the final thing, if you want to go back to Document Center, you can click there too, I guess. Yeah, just go back to Document Center. The purpose of trust legacy letters, you can scroll down there, and that'll create, essentially this is kind of an interview style where it will kind of go back and forth, interview you. Either you can write it or it'll do it verbally, and essentially create those documents for you. So we put a bunch of effort into this, and we're going to give you guys this for free. We do ask, there's a window in here as you start to use it that you can provide feedback. And so the QR code that's in the workbook will allow you to access this website and take advantage of essentially a really simple way to establish that foundational framework for your family bank.
Something to remember, so many times we get caught up in, am I buying a life insurance policy? Am I creating this trust? And there's very little emotion attached with those transactions. And so what we've tried to do is build in the emotional part of the love that you have for your family. And a lot of the vision that you have in taking the acts of purchasing the policy or getting the trust done or the LLC or whatever legal document it is. So delving into your mindset, the values that you want to leave in your children and grandchildren, not just to them, are really self-generated by going through the process of creating these documents. We wrote about this a lot in the Perpetual Wealth book, but we kept hearing, well, what do I do? Okay, you had a sample letter, but how do I create mine? And so Patrick in particular has put a lot of thought into those prompts that the AI can facilitate for you to pull out of your heart and your mind the thinking and the mindset and the values that you want to leave in your children and grandchildren.
So the thing is with these documents, as I've mentioned several times now, when you're breaking a pattern of behavior, breaking, even yourself, having these as a kind of an accountability partner this kind of lays out, here are the rules of engagement. Here are how things work. Here's how we're going to operate it. And it's not you communicating to your kids verbally. It's actually something concrete, documented, that everybody is going to follow. It's value-based, it's principle-based, and it's also, the source really comes from successful family bank organizations within estate planning. This isn't just something that came out of the blue. There's a lot of resources that went into this to create kind of legitimate, here are some values, here's some structure, here's how you do things, and then it'll help you put your specific twist or spin on it based on your family dynamic. So so we're kind of getting to the end. This is one of the first things we want you to do is have access to this. Part of it is establishing that, because hopefully you've seen some opportunities within your family, some things you can change. You don't have to go all in, but especially starting with just some simple mission statement, simple vision statement, simple set of values, and a borrower guide. It'll take less than an hour, and you can establish that and actually start teaching kids or grandkids. And if you want to keep going to a new level, all these other tools exist for you as well. Now, obviously, you don't have to do this alone. You guys have guidance here at the organization with both Prosperity Partners as well as Paradigm Life. And we're going to actually talk about something else. There's something Kim has been working on for over a year now and put really a huge amount of heart into it. And she shifted her kind of career path. And we want to introduce you guys to something that could even take the implementation of this to another level and actually make it a lot more simple. So Kim, all yours.
Awesome. Happy to share. So let's skip forward to that. Perfect. Thank you. One of the things that's difficult in the work that you're doing with your families is feeling like you're by yourself. Because when you go to the water cooler and you say, I've bought a life insurance policy, or even I've done a trust or a will, or hey, have you created an LLC? You'll get some pretty blank stares. And so we've been working on creating a community to support the effort that you are putting forth, not only in the ownership of life insurance and those legal documents that can go with it, but in the actual creating of your children and grandchildren. And for those of you that don't have children, many of you are involved with children, whether it's Boys and Girls Club or Sunday School or what have you. So we are a community, if you'll, thank you, let me inch forward here, of families that are raising children to create value in the world first. This is that child that figured out how to sell his friends and family members and community shoes. This was a way for him to create value. Another quick story, talk about the second bullet point there, is a place to go for practical family wisdom. Some of the communities have teenager attendance. Some of them are virtual, some of them are physical. And the teenagers often start in this space with their hoodies up and their headsets on and scowls on their faces. But when we talk about the practical steps that we work on inside the Prosperity Parents community, which is the name of it, those hoodies come off, the headphones either get left behind or set aside, and there's engagement, and that's enabling us to build on it, because you can't do this alone. You want your entire family involved. So the challenge that we all have is that we're wanting to raise kids that are value creators and being very purposeful in creating value as a family, each of us as adults as well as our children and grandchildren, and beginning a method and a conversation around family legacy. And please do not feel like you have nothing to leave. That's a common feeling of families at really all levels of income. Oh my gosh, I don't have anything to leave. I'm going to need all my money. Money is only one tiny little part about it. Think about your legacy as what you leave in them, not just what you leave to them. And so if we can overcome the challenges of the fact that typical K through 12 education is not creating value creation oriented children, and that as parents, we're incredibly busy. I mean, I look at our adult children, it's mind-boggling. I thought I was busy as a young mother. It's mind-boggling what they're doing in their schedules these days. But furthermore, our culture with those 10,000 messages, your kids are getting, your grandkids are getting those 10,000 messages too. And it's causing us to be very extrinsically, that's a tough word to say, motivated. Very materially motivated. And there's nothing wrong with material value creation. In fact, we'll get into that. What we have as a solution is value creation on all three levels: material value creation, spiritual value creation, and emotional value creation. I'll talk a little bit more about those three in a moment. We also have house rules, very specific house rules. I'll give them to you today, that are in this community that all of the parents and grandparents in this community are functioning with. And then there's financial competency. There's so much conversation about financial literacy, but let's take that up a notch and get to the financial competency space where our children are not just homeworking money, because you can't really homework money. You have to experience it. And where we're also enabling them to go through some healthy struggles. And I think of the solution, the four things that I've gone over there: the value creation, the house rules, the financial competency, and the healthy struggles. It's the struggles that are sometimes the hardest. And it's also those struggles that enable for the best solutions to come about. So as we look at the value creation aspects, I talked about material value creation. Money and material things, completely fine and part of our cultures to want those things. And so we want to guide our children in material value creation and experiences. But we also want to mix in the emotional value, which is how we feel, pulling in those feelings, and how we make others feel. When you walk into a room, do you bring energy to that room or do you take energy from that room? And you can start working on this with children as young as 2 and 3 years old as they go to their friends for play date or what have you. And then the spiritual value creation, I didn't say religious, you could interpret it at that, but spiritual value creation is really about connectedness and the inspirational element. So if the word spiritual doesn't work for you, maybe the word inspirational works for you. The inspirational element, we want to start with our 1 and 2 and 3-year-old children. But there's things inside the Prosperity Parents community that you can use for your teenagers as well, if there's space around these 3 different value creations that you want to work with teenagers, or you feel like you're, as an adult, still needing help with some of the monetary aspects. I've had 40 and 50 years old people go through a lot of the Prosperity Parents material and say, this was valuable for me. Yes, it helped me with my kids, but I benefited from it a lot as well. So this is part of what's happening inside this community. The financial competency, as I spoke of, is because just literacy isn't enough. You can't homework money. You've got to learn about earning, saving, and investing by doing. And that's those practical steps that we talked about earlier. We want to give you as adults practical steps. We want to give you as parents practical steps so that you can give your children practical steps that will then raise financially competent adults. We're not raising financially competent children. We're raising financially adults, right? Adults. Yeah. So just to finish up here, some steps that you can take. And there's a QR code on the right of this slide and the ones going forward.
And the workbook too.
And also in the workbook, thank you, about gaining access to this community. It is a deep resource for very practical wisdom. There are examples of what's working and what's not working, which means there's winnings and there's learnings, right? Inside the community, parents are sharing what they're doing with their kids in terms of what's happening and what's working and not working with their kids and the various ideas that we have inside the community. And then there's just a stacking on of wisdom, not only that we share, but what other parents that are working with these ideas are sharing. So you have people in the community like myself that have children and grandchildren that raised those children with these methods. And then you have many, many young families with children that are 1 and 2 and 3 years old and their daily activities of what they're doing with their children. So I'm just, in the interest of time, going to skip forward here to a 12. This is just a placeholder really of a slide, but there's a 12-month process that we go through over and over again. It doesn't matter where, thank you, team, I appreciate that. It doesn't matter where you come in. You can see like month 5, the house rules. We get into that. Month 2, the leveraging of struggle, etc. And then as we progress throughout the year, there are conference calls every month that you can get on. They're recorded, of course. But I think most importantly, inside there's a free community and a paid for community. And so if I can have the picture back, thank you. I'll finish up there. We can be done. There is a space for you to get involved. So if you like the idea of just putting a toe in the water and checking out the free community, please do that with the QR code or at prosperityparents.com. There's an app of the activity in the community. So if the cell phone space and apps works better for you, that's fine. If you prefer the computer, that's fine. But come and join us. Get engaged in the community. Patrick talked about the actions that we want you to take. We're going to stop here shortly and set aside time for Q&A. But the actions that we want you to take are to get involved with the familybank.ai legacy documents, get involved with the community, get involved with the courses, and make this practical application occur for you on a weekly basis. Spend a little bit of time every week, because as we've been talking about for the last couple of years, it's typically not one big thing that makes the difference. It's itty bitty steps all along the way.
Yeah, but consistency, right? And
Yes.
that's what's important. And a lot of times what it takes for a lot of these things is to have something in place that causes that consistency. If we try to do it on our own, it's kind of like budgeting. It's just not going to happen, right?
Yeah.
We just can't do it. And so we need some tools in place to help us do that. And I think where the community really falls in is such a critical piece is it goes back to what you were talking about, Patrick, earlier, and that is we're not on necessarily the typical path of where people are. And so if we're doing something different, if your neighbors aren't doing that, if the people that you talk to aren't doing that, where do you find somebody, a cohort, to help you on that journey? And that's where Prosperity Parents comes in, because now then we've got like-minded people together.
Yep. Okay, well, we'll end and then start to get into questions.
Yeah.
But I'll say this before we end, and I totally forgot to put it in my notes, but I wrote down the wealthiest person in South Korea.
Oh, yeah.
And multi-billionaire, I can't even remember his name. So that just tells you, the example I was going to give is, I bet none of you on here even know who he is. And the reason I bring that up is, you look at our life, how quick it goes, and we have a choice. We have a choice that, are we going to leave a legacy? Are we going to leave something behind? Are we going to make the world better? You don't have to make that choice. But if you do, it's going to be something that's different than the status quo, because the status quo gets left behind. Nobody remembers who the status quo is, let alone multi-billionaires from South Korea. So the point is, you have an opportunity. I mean, if this is something that you're serious about, if you want to be remembered by your kids and grandkids and change your family dynamic for generations, you have a choice. But it has to be an intentional choice. These are ways in which it's been done. There are principles behind it, values behind it, but it isn't the status quo. It isn't just showing up the same way tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day. It requires intention. I would say we have it easy because we chose a career around it. You haven't. And so my challenge to you is, these are just some simple things that you can do. You don't have to jump in all at once. You can start with something simple and just stack on that. Stack a little bit more, stack a little bit more. The community that Kim just introduced the investment is like hardly anything, but that's not the point. The investment of time is what that community requires. But if you're serious about it, here are tools. You're at the water. We can't force you to drink, but you have to make a decision. And even a no decision is a decision. So we'll leave with that. Obviously, we're going to go into questions and scenarios, but as we do these live streams month in and month out, that's what we're trying to impart on you is, here's some things that can change your life, your family's life, and it's not this tactic or risk-based strategy. these are principles, these are tools, these are things that have worked for a lot of other families before and can work for you too. So let's go ahead and do some questions.
Yes, thank you all for joining. We're done with
Yep.
the formal part, but we love the Q&A part. So the team will help us with some questions, and love the first one. Andrew, I saw you pop quite a few in. Thank you very much. Can a trust own a whole life insurance policy, and what are the benefits of doing so? I know Gary answered on the chat box, but you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I would say it's first, stepping back and understanding the scenario, right? So you have to look at a trust, and a trust is you can look at it as like a person, right? A trust has to execute certain things legally, and you can essentially write a trust, are the grantor, right, of essentially saying this is how I want things done here, 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 and the trust can own assets. So there's the practical side of it, and then there's obviously the purpose side of it. I would first say, like, what's the purpose that you want the trust, to carry out? There's certain things when it comes to taxation, asset protection, so there's reasons to do it, but there's also reasons not to do it. Some people do it because they heard it was a good idea, but it may not be the best idea. And so a trust can own insurance. It could be the beneficiary of insurance, and the ownership has to essentially align with how the trust was set up, all of its different, because a trustee is the one that is essentially carrying that out. And it could be you while you're alive, but it then becomes another trustee when you pass on, which essentially says, here is how this specific asset is going to be utilized. It may not be just the insurance, it could be other assets as well, but you got to look at a trust as like an entity that is programmed to do something, and you get to program it. But there are reasons to do it, there's reasons not to do it. So you have to look at really the objective first, because there could be a better way. Going the trust route, there's expense there. There's sometimes you can't unwind certain things that you set up. So you got to obviously do some evaluation, look at different options with your advisor or your wealth strategist. But there are definitely good reasons to do it.
I'll add in that it's fairly easy to put a life insurance policy in a trust later. Mm-hmm. So don't stop with the life insurance progress. The good news is most of you already own policies, but as you're looking to purchase your second, your third, and your 10th and 20th policy, you can do that and then put it in a trust later. You can always also make the beneficiary of the policy a trust. Yep. So you have ownership of trusts and beneficiary being trusts, and both of those things need to get looked at.
So it's cool. It was, I totally forgot. So one of the links from the previous live stream had in there essentially a program GPT that's based on the most recent comprehensive, like hundreds of page documents of the actual laws associated with estate planning, business planning, succession planning, exit planning, employee benefits. And so you can actually query that GPT and ask those questions. Here's my scenario. Does this trust, does owning a policy inside the trust make sense? Why and why not? And it'll come from the legal perspective. If you don't have that, then we'll make sure we'll get that link to you. But it was given in the previous live stream. So it's in that workbook.
Super. Next question. Can you send out the spreadsheet? I can't see it clearly, especially when you show the speaker. Sorry about that. Numbers are important. So the spreadsheet, I'm guessing, David, that you are speaking about is one of many that we showed tonight. We can think about how to maybe have a picture of those available in your workbook.
Yep. Plus the video is going to go out where you can kind of zoom in, take a look at
and pause it.
And pause it, yep.
Thank you for telling us that. Thad, in the analysis, would you lower the interest rate along with the shorter term regarding the real estate example? So like when we went to 180 months, would we lower that interest rate?
Yeah, so we could, absolutely. But what happens is a half a point is usually what our differential is between, say, a 30-year mortgage and a 15-year mortgage. Mm-hmm. Going to that shorter time frame to pick up a half a point is going to actually still be less beneficial, and we can look at that actually real quickly if that's helpful, just to make sure. So let's pull Kim's computer up. So here, go back to the 360 just a minute, Kim. So at 360 we see 13.64%. Let's take that to 180.
And note, we're at 6.75 for the mortgage on the 360.
Right. It goes to 11.45. Let's go down to 6. Let's take 3/4 of a point off of it.
Yep.
It's still not as good as the longer mortgage on the
Yep.
shorter time frame.
Yep. Plus, you look at the negative cash flow because of the shorter mortgage.
Yeah.
It's negative 94 as opposed to a positive cash flow with a 30-year mortgage.
And the thing is, people are focused on the size of that mortgage, and they think, get it paid off quicker. And something, we mentioned Mike Isom earlier, something that he taught me was, I think, a great line, and that is, if your objective is to have it paid off in 15 years, I think there's a better method for making that happen. And the better method, in most cases, would be to have the 360-month mortgage, keep that difference in the payments aside, and then pay it off at the 15-year mark if that's still something that you want to do. But it gives you that cash flow, the flexibility. You can handle if we have a 2008 and now then we don't have rents, we've got a pool of money to pull from.
Yep.
So it gives all kinds of flexibility without being locked in.
Yep.
And the difference, if you'll notice, and I think this is really the most important part, our cash out is exactly the same whether we do the 30-year mortgage or the 15-year mortgage. So it begs the question then, what does the equity in my house do for the value of the house? And it's actually nothing.
Yeah.
Right.
So how I put it, again, the conditioning that we're used to is to not have debt, to get debt paid off as soon as possible. And if you really look at the only reason to do a 15-year mortgage is not financial and it's not mathematical. You should never do it if that's the approach you're taking. If it's emotional and you don't want to have debt, that's why you make the decision. But ultimately, it puts you in one of the most risky situations ever, because the only way you can actually get access to any equity in the house is by selling the house or taking out a loan anyway. And so that's the thing. It's like there's the mathematical approach, the economic approach, and it doesn't make sense at all to ever have a 15-year mortgage, period. But if you want to make that decision, you have to do so saying, I'm not making an optimal decision, I'm making an emotional decision, and I'm worse off financially making it. And that's why I question conditioning. That's a conditioned approach. I felt that way. I was programmed that way. But when I look at the actual math, it never makes sense to do it, period. But again, it's just one of those, like we get that question all the time. That's one of the reasons why this calculator exists.
So if you'd like proof of that, if that is a struggle for you or you're just curious, you can go to my Busting the Interest Rate Lies book.
And it's linked in the workbook.
Yep. So the link will take you to, there's an audio version of that book. There's a Kindle version of that book. There's a physical version of that book, which I would recommend for this one because it has step by step by step proof of every calculator that Todd uses to prove numerically and financially and mathematically that a 30-year mortgage is more efficient than a 15-year mortgage. And as Patrick was saying, there's oftentimes that emotions get involved in that decision. But if you're just stepping back and looking at it economically or numerically, mathematically, those steps going through those calculators will prove that to you. And that can sometimes help with the emotional aspect of that decision. Yep. So,
but you got to realize that the emotions come from conditioning. And it's because we're naturally resistant to doing things differently. And that just comes with being an adult. And I think we all experience it as adults. That's why it's hard to break the pattern. It's hard to break that cycle because in the end, like I said, I used to say that there were reasons to do it. I now say that there are no reasons to do it.
There's one exception that I would say.
All right. Says the math guy, really?
Yeah, well, so thinking back, and this is before your time, so you wouldn't understand when we had...
Before my time?
Yes, when we had 20+% mortgages.
Okay.
All right, so...
Okay, all right. Yeah, if you have a choice, like right now, between a 30-year mortgage and a 15-year mortgage, you can qualify for both, and you have interest rates there. That's what I mean.
There you go, I know.
Yeah.
In addition, if the book route is not helpful to you, your strategist can send you a video that Todd made going through that discussion of the 15 to the 30-year mortgage. It's about a 15-minute video. It's thorough. It's not on YouTube, but your wealth strategist has it. So either somebody on my team or somebody on Patrick's team can get that video for you if that's a better way for you to learn.
Yep. And I'll say one other thing too, which is, not to beat a dead horse, but Todd spent the better part of 6 months, 7 months, basically building a calculator to disprove this whole getting a HELOC, using it to pay all your bills, and suddenly you're going to be out of debt sooner. which is a complete fallacy. Even though it's everywhere on the internet, mathematically it is completely false. And he had to spend all that time just to create the calculator that disproves that. So that's on his blog as well if you guys want to check that out.
Awesome. Next question, please. Paul, thank you. Can you get granular in the time of college with regards to the asset flow? Paul, do you want to turn your microphone on and elaborate on that a little bit?
Paul?
Oh, we're not
there we go.
hearing
Yeah,
you,
we got it.
Paul.
Yeah,
Can
we
you
got it.
start
You do?
over?
No.
Yeah, this is Paul Seitz. My name is spelled S-E-I-T-Z. I'm not sure who's using my name. That's not me.
Oh, somebody's used.
Well, there's another Paul that I can see. Paul, the other Paul. Do you want to?
Paul's long lost brother.
You were speaking. Do you want to go ahead?
Oh, he's speaking.
But we can't hear you.
Yeah, we can't hear.
Huh? We could hear other Paul.
Yeah.
About now.
Oh,
Yes.
there you go.
It was me. I'm not sure how the last name got tagged to that question. It was in your example of the family, the 200,000, 40,000. And in the spreadsheet, there was a difference in the asset outlay during those college years. And I was just kind of curious how the use of the the life insurance policy change that value,
Yep.
specifically in those years.
Yep.
Sure. So there was a couple of things that we did there, and
So hold on a second. Video team, if we could have the whole slide and don't try to show the speaker view, maybe that'll make it a little bit easier. The slide that I've got on my computer. Perfect. Thank you so much.
so one of the things that happens. There was a little bit of a difference here. Part of it was the way we financed it, and we were able to finance it at a lower rate from the insurance company than from student loan. So that's part of it. The other part of it is we had kids have skin in the game, and that's a big part of what we talked about and why it's so important having. It's not just everything is a mathematical or a financial decision. It's really deeper than that. And so for example, kids are making decisions on what school to go to based on what the campus looks like. Really? You're going to go out of state to some place and you don't care about the curriculum, you're cared more about what the campus looks like? Well, to me, that's on you as the kid. If you really want to pay for that, then you make up that difference. And so what we did here was we're going to pay part of it. We're going to pay enough if they went in-state and local, they could handle the whole thing rather than paying the whole $50,000.
Yep.
But if the child wants to do more than that, then they can get the grants, they can get the scholarships, and they can ultimately pay for that piece of it. So we split some of that cost with the child as well as financing it a little bit better. It's still going to be a cost, right? Whether we use a life insurance policy, whether we refinance our house to do it, we can reduce those costs, but it's still going to be a cost at some level. But still, a reduction in cost with opportunity has a tremendous difference over time. Does that answer that?
That does. Thank you.
Awesome. One of the things that we teach in the Prosperity Parents community is called pay to a point. And so, for example, if you decide that it is the right time to buy your child a cell phone, maybe you pay $100 of that phone cost and then they pick up the difference. If they want to come up with $900 to get the latest fill in the blank, great. If they want to just spend another $100 to get the simple phone, great. And then same with the monthly bill, right? Pay to a point. So that's just a teaching that's inside that Prosperity Parents community that's an example of how we're helping you actually reduce the cost of raising a child, but more importantly, we're helping you raise financially competent adults. All right,
Yeah,
next.
I would say the principle of it is, especially if you teach at a young age with small things, when you get to the biggest thing that they're ever going to essentially have money spent on them, over a short period of time, 4 years or so, they've been essentially trained by you. They've been influenced so that when they do go to college, it becomes an optimized decision. So it could be, getting scholarships and being prepared for that well in advance. It could be how they choose housing. It could be how they, choose the actual major they take or the classes that they take. The idea is that when they go into it, it's not going to be the same transaction. Similar to how Todd was talking about cars, how you purchase a home, the mortgage that you choose, all of these decisions are going to stack on top of one another, including this one. So parents laying out all that money and taking it away from obviously the money that they're saving and putting aside right now for their future, okay, obviously it's going to make a huge impact on them in the future. The idea is to put kids, essentially with skin in the game so that it reduces the amount that comes out from the parents, and that makes an impact over time. And you could spin in a number of ways. It could be a 50-50 split. It could be, you have grades that if they get A's, you pay for everything. If they get B's, you split it 50-50. There's a lot of ways you can, essentially structure an optimized decision. The fact is, having that mindset going in, you're going to treat the money outlay differently than the average person.
Awesome. Next question. Thank you, John. Question regarding familybank.ai. This user interface is just an end user UI that can help folks build content, correct? Yes. But do you want to address the legal official aspect of it?
Yeah, when it comes to anything that has to do with estate planning, right, there are specific legal requirements. And so even though, we essentially use tools to train based on all of the legal structures of estate planning, the idea for this tool is really just a simple way to implement the concepts, and that's those first few modules. We still want you to use it so you give us feedback, because that could be something we actually do, is ensure that there is, like, to the letter, everything refined legally. But obviously that's a huge investment, huge endeavor. We put something together, so yeah, it's basically nothing, no data stored. This is something you produce, you keep in your files and your records. It simply is an engine to establish those foundational documents.
Thank you. Next question. Edna, how many years should a legacy trust be? My attorney says if it goes too long, the more difficult it is to keep all the life insurance policies going. What do you suggest? Todd, you want to tackle that?
Yeah, it all depends on how the policy was set up, right? And that, quite honestly, is one of the problems that we see with a universal life policy over a whole life policy, is because those mortality costs get huge out there at the end, and that's when you need it to be in place the most. So it happens in a whole life policy too, but the mortality charges are already guaranteed as to what they're going to be, and there's enough money set aside to handle that increasing cost. And so the whole life policy, that's why they're set up for your whole life. And the universal life policies, while they're often sold as whole life policy for half the price, you can't get the same thing for half the price. It's just not. And where it ends up hurting is exactly what Edna pointed out, and that is the longer that goes inside the trust, the harder it's going to be to keep
maintain
that thing going. And if you've ever stopped putting money in, which is some of the idea on the universal life policies of stopping early, it really takes way too much to catch up at the end, and that is a problem. So it depends on the policy and how it's structured.
So remember also that a life insurance policy has a death benefit, and that is a cash amount that goes into the trust or to the beneficiaries upon death. So if you think about, for example, a 3-generation space where maybe you're the grandparent and then you have adult children and then you have grandchildren, ideally you all already have policies on your life. And so upon death, that policy is going to complete, and the amount of the death benefit, which depending on how old you are, may actually be complete with the amount of cash, is going to become liquid and pay into the trust or go directly to the beneficiaries, however you have it set up. And so the idea with our generational worth, our generational work and perpetual wealth is to keep everything going. So the oldest generation has life insurance on their lives that pays out. Those policies are done. That turns into all cash. Income tax-free death benefits paid at that point. Then you've got the next generation, and that generation also has life insurance on them. And those people die, and those policies pay out. And now those policies are complete. And then you've got the third generation. And The grandparents have now maybe purchased insurance on the third generation. Well, when the grandparents pass on, then maybe the fourth generation is already in place, like born, right? They're young. And now the cash from the death benefit can be utilized to purchase insurance on the fourth generation. This is how you build perpetual wealth. Yes, it's optimizing cash flow for cars. Yes, it's optimizing how you handle mortgages. Yes, it's optimizing how you handle education. But at a very elementary level, it's just literally buying life insurance on every generation and making it perpetual. Okay, next question. Nan, beyond working with a personal wealth strategist, at what point and for what purpose is an attorney needed? So I'll just add in to what Patrick already said about the criticalness of right now having your legal documents checked. It depends on what state you live in. So when we say legal documents, we mean wills, trusts, LLCs, that kind of thing. Life insurance is a contract document, but it's not a legal document. So your wealth strategist is licensed and works with that space. But it is important at this stage to have an attorney involved. Now, as we all know, AI is changing things immensely, and we're doing some research as we speak. As a opportunity might exist to make that process a little easier, because frankly, right now, meeting with an attorney, going through the process, it's 6 to 12 months. It can get expensive, very time consuming, et cetera. So I do see that shifting very quickly with the AI space coming into the legal environment, but we'll just see what happens.
Yeah, we're working on something right now. We're hoping to have some announcement in the next couple months. But yeah, there's some platforms that are going to make the estate planning side of strategies so much easier, and it does integrate some of these AI tools, but it's done so in this very straightforward way. And yeah, we're working on it. We're about to pull the trigger on it. So look for some news this summer.
Yeah, I would also argue that having those documents is going to shorten that other time frame too. If you've already created all this and you take this to an attorney, it's just a matter of signing stuff at that point in time. Really.
Yeah, because these core documents right now is more to set up the kind of the idea, the philosophy, the approach, the structure while you're alive. The estate planning is really meant to be a set of instructions once you pass on. And there's obviously other elements, circumventing probate, which is a huge. But the concept of estate planning, again, as I said previously, is it becomes essentially a non-living person programmed to do certain things, and it carries out those things, those wishes. That what we introduced today is establishing those principles, values, mission, vision, so that you can actually teach your family right now, give them that direction, because ultimately that's what the trust is going to do anyway. Okay, it just does it in a more formal way.
I'll share a story as someone who has spent thousands of dollars in going through legal processes around the estate work, the wills, the trusts, the family limited partnerships, et cetera. Those documents are there and functioning for our family. But what is way more meaningful to me are those legacy letters, or prosperity permissives is what I called ours. And I tend to write one every other year or so to my adult children and now grandchildren. And those are the emotional aspects of the heritage with the values that I want left in those children and grandchildren. And those are way more meaningful to me than the legal document that I've spent thousands of dollars on. So get engaged with this AI. It will help you. These were not easy letters to write. And the AI process will help you pull the emotion that you have out and get it on paper so that you can share it with those children and grandchildren and adult children and great-grandchildren as well. Yep. Thank you. Awesome. Next question. Marie, do we need to create a new living trust? Where do we direct our future?
Yeah, there's if you have a living trust right now, you can amend trusts, you can restate them. You have a lot of options there. I mean, it's always, I would say the estate planning isn't a one and done thing. And that's what we often see clients do is they set it up, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and they just think that, okay, I've done it. I don't need to do anything else. But I would say there is reason to evaluate it every year. Do it with your wealth strategist, do it with your attorney. And like I said, there's some tools that we're working on that'll make it easier to restate, make it easier to get enforced, to fund it. That's something that we've seen so many times as an estate plan that's set up, and it was set up based on the circumstances of that time, which have all changed. Kids, assets, philosophy, marriage, and it not updating those, not reviewing them, and keeping that in your repertoire, your modus operandi, that is it's a critical part of making sure that document actually does its job. Because if you set up an estate plan, you can even sign it, it may not make any difference if something happened to you just based on the actual execution. And unfortunately, we've seen that a number of times. So you don't necessarily have to do a new one, but again, it depends. You're gonna have to review it. Don't review it alone, and see if you need to make an update or if you need to change, maybe the type of trust. There's a lot of different moving parts, but I would say review first.
And the aspect of funding it is also really important. So you have the family limited trust or, family legacy trust or whatever you called it. But then funding it means going and changing beneficiaries,
Of your assets,
changing ownership, getting involved with your banks and your brokerage houses and your insurance companies. And that second step is often left out.
Yeah.
It will be very interesting to me to see as we go forward with what AI can help us with, because frankly, that's the hardest part of the estate planning. It's not getting that legal document done.
It's not. It's making sure it's maintained, funded, everything. I's are dotted, T's are crossed.
And I don't remember what the stats were, but we had heard talking to an attorney, it was something like of the documents that they reviewed, 10 years from when it was previously done from another attorney or something like that, something like 50% of them were never funded.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean,
very
it's huge.
high.
They did the trouble and spent the money on all of the paperwork and never funded the trust with any assets.
So I'll just restate funding, because sometimes funding has different meaning, but funding is the trust actually has to be the ownership or owner of the asset or the beneficiary of the asset legally in order for that trust to actually do something about it. If it's not, you might as well not have a trust. That's the challenge.
Yep. Next question. Joel, my kids are all adults, but do not seem interested in investing in life insurance. Yes, we understand this. I have told them they can borrow against the policies, nice use of language, I have set up for them once they set up and start contributing to their own policy. I love this. Should I keep trying to educate them or just wait until they need it?
So, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say there's an interesting thing that happens with the life insurance policy for a lot of people. A lot of people buy it initially kind of on faith, I guess, because there has to be some faith. When you hear all the stuff you're getting bombarded about why not to have one, you kind of have to go out on faith that you trust. Well, I saw the math. It does work. Was it real math? I mean, there's a lot of things there. Yeah. Why is everybody else, out of step on this? But what I've seen happen thousands of times is when somebody is in a place where they use it the first time, either unfortunately from an emergency of some kind, or ideally from an opportunity, all of a sudden it makes sense. Yep. And they realize that's what I should have done, except I should have done a whole lot more. And so, the thing about it is once they use it the first time, I'm going to guess that all of a sudden it'll make sense to them.
Yeah. So what I'd say is, and this is, it's an interesting dynamic where when you say something as an individual to an individual, like with words, with verbal communication, there's obviously nonverbal communication going on. It's weird how people receive communication, because when they receive it, they're receiving it in the context of something that existed previously, right? Previous conversation, your relationship dynamic. When you actually put down on paper a mission, vision, values, purpose, your financial philosophy. These are now tools that you have to do that. It communicates from a different perspective. It's almost like a different person communicating. And when they read that, there isn't this same, it's not the same context. It kind of sounds weird, but when they actually read your philosophy on money, the purpose for you setting this up, the purpose for you setting your estate up, your legacy up, the difference that you want to make, when they see that on paper, try that. I would encourage you to establish that, try that. And then what I would say is, as we mentioned before, when your kids have grandkids, they obviously will love grandparents a lot more sometimes than they love their parents. And now you get to be in there and teach them, educate them, nurture them. And what they're doing, and this is weird, right? Because I'm on the board of a nonprofit, and the success of this nonprofit has come based on a book series that I think they have like 20-something books now, meant for kids. And they wrote those books. First off, the intention behind it was to educate adults, but they actually went through and started educating kids, and the kids started educating their parents, and they've sold tens of millions of copies of these books. And so, like I said, when you're an adult, it's really hard to change. And when they hear something from you, they're not hearing from you right now in 2025. They're hearing from you, based on an experience they had in 2002 or 2004 or 2005. But when you actually separate your philosophy by a verbal conversation and a nonverbal conversation to a document, it makes a bigger difference. And when they get to the heart of your core, your values, the purpose, what you want to leave behind, your mission, I would try that. And I think that's going to have a different level of significance when it comes to actually teaching them what you're doing.
And I would just add to keep walking the talk and keep demonstrating all that you can around all aspects of money, because this is what your kids are watching. And we all know as parents, or at least we hear, that they tend to learn more from what we do than what we say. And so just keep walking the talk. Don't give up. This is a lifelong endeavor, and something that we talk about in the Prosperity Parents community all the time is this aspect of you can't homework money. It must be done something with, sometimes literally physical, sometimes as emotionally connected as it can be. And so very specifically for a practical tip, I would encourage you to go ahead and have a loan processed and a transaction completed. And we've given you in the AI a way to set up loan documents. I would make sure that there is an automated structure to have that loan paid back. And it can be for as little as $1,000 just to do something to get money moving, because that's really what needs to happen, not only in your own economy, but also in your young adults' economies. So I believe that was the last question.
I was going to say something about that. Just a thought I had. Maybe it's just really late. But there's an interesting, it depends on how old your adult kids are, but I think there's this interesting cycle that I've gone through, and I have learned, studied about it, and I know a lot of other people go through it. It's kind of almost natural. But there's this cycle, especially sons and fathers, where when you're super young, your dad's your hero. And then you go through this cycle where it's dad doesn't know as much as I thought he knew. Man, dad's kind of an idiot. I'm way smarter than him. And then they get into adulthood, and then it all comes back full circle. And so that's the point of consistency, right? Is if that cycle is true, which I think there is some validity to it, then just keep obviously demonstrating, but there'll be a point in time where your kids will come and they'll be like, man, dad knows a lot more than I thought he knew. And I speak from personal experience, but I know a lot of others that do as well.
Well, as we wrap up, I wanted to reiterate something that we shared quite a few live streams ago, and this is for you all, but also very specifically for your adult children, and that is the currents structure. So currents, CURRENCE. We've demonstrated numerous different ways the value of not putting your earned income into the checking account where you pay your bills.
Your spending account, yep.
And so if there's anything that I would encourage young adults to do, or if you are listening to me as a parent with young adult children, you can encourage them to do, which again, model it yourself first, you'll get better results. It's to take advantage of that. It is by invitation only. And if you'll get with your wealth strategist, you can get an invitation to that. Structure, it's an app plus an account. And we've seen that step make the biggest difference in people's finances.
Yep.
Yeah, that's actually part two. I didn't talk about it earlier, that we did
That's right.
incorporate into the solution that we had earlier, where we saw that big difference. Yes, part of it was structuring our cars better, part of it was structuring the education better and having a deal with our kids to pay some of the cost. But we also had currents in there to keep us from spending money we wouldn't normally spend, right?
Yep. Super. So did another question pop in? If so, I'll let you pop that on the screen. Just in wrapping up, a couple of things from my thought, kind of big ahas. Does it have a cost? Thank you. The currents structure has a bank cost, but there's no cost to us or for the app, correct? There's a bank cost that's $40 a quarter to maintain the actual bank account that does earn interest.
So it makes up for it.
So
pretty
with
much,
about $5,000 or $6,000 of an emergency fund stored in that account, the interest on the account will pay the bank fee. So thank you for asking that. So just a couple wrap-up things, and then I'm sure each of you have something to add as well. First of all, thank you so much. In fact, to our tech team, if we could see the gallery on the screen, that would be great. We really appreciate those of you that sign up for the VIP and show up with your cameras on. It lets us feel, hello, it lets us feel engaged, and we're really, really grateful to you all for doing that. As we continue to work on these, please continue to give us feedback. There's feedback forms in familybank.ai. There's feedback forms on the workbook. You can just reply to the email if that's an easier way to give us feedback in terms of what we might be working on for our live streams in the fall. And then for today, I just want to summarize from my perspective. When you look at the space of the family banking structure or perpetual wealth or prosperity or paradigm, whatever you want to call it, there's some really critical things that must take place. I think currents is one of them. I think getting clear on mortgages is another. Optimizing, we've used that word a lot. Optimizing means taking what you have and getting it to do the best that it can do. Maximizing is what typical financial planning goes after. It's just build as big of a pile as you can. We've been able to prove numerous times in numerous ways that optimizing gets you so much better results. And the good news about that is it's just little baby steps. Yep. It's never one big thing. So if you're not clear what your next baby step is, please reach out to us. Let us help guide you on what that next step is. Todd?
Yeah, no, I it's a lot to come spend 2 hours with us in the evening. Your time's precious. We really appreciate you being here. It's a passion of ours. It's the reason we do what we do is because we want to make a difference in the world. And unfortunately, all that 10,000 bombardments we get a day, most of it is not helpful, and we've got a big battle. And that's why the community with prosperity parents is important. That's why a community of you guys with each other, as with us, is important. We really need to build this movement in the right direction and make a significant change in where people are financially.
Cool. Well, let's wrap up. Yeah, thank you guys. This is, it means a lot. I mean, we've still have a couple hundred people on here, even though it's really late. And this is we come up with different ways to teach. We try to bring current events in. We try to bring examples in. But as I said at the beginning, your stories, your questions, your scenarios, if you could communicate that to us or communicate those to us, we would love that, because sometimes we're always trying to figure out better ways to communicate, better ways to provide solutions. And so that direct communication would mean the world. But truly appreciate you guys being here tonight. Hopefully you found some value. And the workbook, obviously there's some resources in there. the previous live streams. I think there's links in the workbook to all the previous live streams, so you can check those out. And then, yeah, you guys aren't going to be here for a couple of months.
Right.
For the summer, we may do kind of an impromptu live stream just based on this estate planning tool that we're trying to onboard. So look out for some emails and some invites in July and August for that. But
Then we'll be back in September.
We'll be back
Yep.
in September. Keep it rolling.
See you then.
So,
Thank
all right,
you.
everyone. Take care.
Appreciate you.
Have an amazing night. See ya.